Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Lerner. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Government, and I teach a couple of courses. I teach a course on public policy, and I teach a course on climate change. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about three things that I'm doing that hopefully that my experience can inform your own approach to teaching. Or maybe you guys can point out things I could do better. I'd love that. So I'm going to first talk about what do I tell my students about generative AI. So the first thing I do is I say, you don't have to start with generative AI. There are plenty of interesting and helpful tools that stop short of generative AI. And I'm talking first about writing support tools, specifically something like Grammarly, a grammar checker. For a lot of students who have English as a second language, it's not the challenge of writing an email to begin with, because everybody is going to have that basic level of English at LSE to feel comfortable doing a first draft of an email. It's then getting the, did I mess up the agreement between articles? How embarrassing. Something like a grammar checker, I use that all the time in my own work because I make all kinds of typos. So I try to normalize that. It's free. There's a freemium version, but it's not worth it in my own view. So I just say, start there, right? Start there. The second thing I say is that you can use and abuse generative AI. So using it, we can talk about explaining concepts, right? We've already talked about that. And also challenging arguments. That hasn't quite been brought up yet, but saying, okay, this is what I want to argue. What are some things that my professor might critique about this argument, or that my colleague might critique? Of course, when we talk about abusing, I actually tend to point towards formulating an argument, because ultimately then that's not your idea. If you asked the computer to generate an idea for you, then you are using their idea, and that ends up coming into the domain of plagiarism, because your hands are on the steering wheel, and if that's not your idea, then it's somebody else's. So I do tell my students, I'm going to ask you not to formulate ideas, but to challenge your ideas using generative AI. And then we also can talk about researching specific facts, at least without verifying that they're true, right? So, okay, maybe the number is 10,000 tons of carbon. Okay, but can you click on the link that was generated by that AI bot and just scroll down and make sure that that number is 10,000? That's like the basic level of work I'm going to ask from these students. And of course, students will eventually just say, well, thanks for that advice, but I'd like to abuse it anyway. So then I talk about, well, I can tell you from my own experience that you end up with low marks because, especially for social science arguments, at this moment in time at least, even very nice versions of AI tend to come up with pretty dull arguments that are very, I don't know, kumbaya, or sort of, you know, we should all have specific policies for specific countries. And I couldn't agree more, but it's a really boring essay. And of course, there is that potential for embarrassment, because if you're trying to abuse AI, the whole point is that you're not writing the essay and checking all the numbers. The point is that way you can go to the pub. So you're not going to be checking, and then there's potential for embarrassment that you got it wrong because there was a hallucination. And I like to point to the ChatGPT lawyer in the United States who submitted a brief with all kinds of made up citations because he was in a rush, trying to go to the pub, I assume, right? And so the potential for embarrassment. So that's what I tell my students. There's ways to use and abuse and plenty of places to go before you go to generative AI. So the second thing I'll talk to you about is how I avoid AI abuse in the assessments that I use. The first thing I do is I check all of the work that I receive through a, could I move forward? Move forward again? Okay, great. So I check everything through an AI detector. My preferred one is GPT-0, but there are plenty of other ones out there in the market. But the question is, when you use an AI detector, is what if it's wrong? And what do I do? And when I get told by this detector that there's a very high chance that this work was generated through AI, I write them an email. And I say, it looks to me like this text was generated by AI. Can you provide evidence of your work on this assignment? And what does evidence look like? It looks like a screenshot of your Google Doc revision history. It looks like showing me that you've highlighted a bunch of PDFs. Show me some evidence. It's worth saying Google Docs revision histories, GPT-0 itself makes a plugin for Microsoft Word and for Google Doc that says how much time you've spent, how many deletions have you made, how many edits have you actually done. So it's an originality report, and I tell my students it's a way to cover your butt, right? If for some reason there's a false positive on this detector, I want you to be able to cover your butt. Last year, I had a blog assignment where I had 4 students whose submissions were flagged. When I asked, were these generated by AI, 3 of them admitted it, to which I said, that's okay, you'll get a 0 for that assessment, but there's plenty of other ways to pass the course. And one of them said, actually, no, that's not true. That's a false positive, and she provided that evidence. And I said, wonderful, here's your mark, right? So we also know from the students' presentation and from our own lives that students are going to use this, especially for asynchronous assignments. So our job now is to reward appropriate use and deter inappropriate use. So here are 3 tactics I use. The first is talking to me. What that looks like is, for example, I moved away from the written blog to a video blog. Record yourself for 5 minutes talking to me about what you would have said in a blog. But if you can talk coherently and fluently about the thing that you would be talking about, sure, maybe you asked AI to help you generate this, but at least you actually believe it. At least you actually are able to inhabit those ideas and convey them. It's not perfect. The second is getting visual. A lot of the tools that exist today, especially free tools, which most students are going to be able to access, are text tools. So getting visual, asking for concept diagrams, asking for tables and figures, that can often make it very difficult. It's just going to deter, right? Somebody who's very determined can go do something. But I'm just trying to avoid the lazy use of generative AI and the lazy abuse of generative AI, because actually, if it's hard, maybe they learned something along the way, right? And the third tactic is getting them to be specific, asking students to go deep into a case, right? So generative AI, ChatGPT is going to tell you that nice, every country should have its own policies. Okay, that's very good. But if I need you to talk to me about the rare earth mining sector in Bolivia, there's going to be a point at which you're actually going to have to read something. There's going to be, if I'm going to ask you for specific numbers, specific ideas, critical thinking, it's making it harder. So the last thing I'll say is talking about some modeling that I use in class of appropriate uses of AI. So there are 3 ways I do that. The first is research support. So a lot of students are really pretty much only familiar with ChatGPT. In my experience, that is the overriding tool, but there are some other tools that are more appropriate. This is an answer engine that is very much like ChatGPT, but you can filter for only academic articles, and it provides links, which you would have to pay for with the ChatGPT 4 version, right? So this is a much more wider, accessible tool. And I use Perplexity, and I also use Elicit, which identifies and summarizes academic research, really going to those articles. It highlights the parts of the articles that are relevant for what they're trying to say. And in class, when they have to do, for example, a sales pitch of a climate policy, they only have 20 minutes. I ask them to use this to pull together some numbers, pull together something credible, and they understand that this is the first cut. This is the first cut. I also ask them to challenge their ideas in class sometimes. So write a reflection and use ChatGPT to challenge that idea that you just reflected, that you just came up with, and that'll kickstart a deeper conversation. And then finally, using DALL-E, which is the OpenAI image generator tool. So for example, when I had a group exercise where people were making rival marketing campaigns, use DALL-E to create storyboards that illustrate sort of what that advertisement would look like if they had more time. So that's a little bit of a lighter touch use of AI. It's not that important as some of the other ones, but it can be a way to bring some of those ideas in those group discussions to life. So thanks very much for listening. I'd love to get more ideas from you all. Thank you very much.